herbalist for, thank you, Claire. And then we'll share who Claire is. I'm a clinical herbalist. I've been an herbalist for a long time, about 24 years now. And I primarily am a Western herbalist. That's my heritage. I'm a Western European American. And I was trained in medical herbalism from David Hoffman at the California School of Herbal Studies and Ayurvedic medicine with Dr. Vasant Malad at the Ayurvedic Institute, and a lot of work on my own, a lot of work with mentors and as an apprentice, and then with indigenous communities. I do a lot of work with preserving and protecting traditional medicine around the world with indigenous and local communities and forest peoples. That's a big part of my heart work, but also some of my current work I'm doing in conservation. So it's really important for me to have people really utilize this information in real time and continued use. Everyone should have this information. And I live in Northern California. I grew up my whole life in California. My dad is a forester. I know wildfires very well. My whole life has been seeing my dad go out to wildfires, and this is the first time in my life I've seen them like this. And since 2017, really hadn't seen wildfires like this. Saw them out in the woods, but not where they're encroaching upon cities and livelihoods and what we call climate change, what we call real issues with indigenous land management practices not being used in BLM land and not being used appropriately. So hopefully those things are changing, but in reality, it's not changing fast enough. And so what I'm here to do is teach you what I've learned. I've worked a lot with first aid responders during wildfires, during times of high stress. And there's a lot we can do. And sometimes it's really just about getting people nourished, listened to, water, and as supportive as we can with their nervous systems. So I'm hoping to be able to share that with you today. Our first section of our class will be lecture with Jim and I. And then our last section, about 30 minutes, is Q&A. We have a class assistant named Claire. Thank you so much. Claire will be managing the chat and helping us with questions. We'll be putting links in there if you want, if you didn't put your email in and you want us to email you with slides afterwards. So thank you, Claire, for being here. And I will pass over the intro to Jim.
Hey, I am Jim McDonald, and I'm an herbalist in Michigan. I practice and work with people. I also do a lot of teaching, and my goal in teaching is to really try to make herbalism accessible to people and not feel like it's specialized knowledge, not feel like, oh, I can only know very basic stuff. And if anything is complicated or hard, then someone else knows that. I think that if we can explain how herbs work, a lot of it is really common sense, and that doesn't mean that anyone could work with the most complicated condition at all, but there's a lot that people can do if they sort of like understand not just what is this herb good for, but how herbalism works and how it works with people. And so that's something I feel very passionate about. Out here in Michigan, we do not have the frequency of wildfires that happen out west. But just a couple years ago, the fires in Ontario really impacted air quality severely here. So I do have experience with this. And I'm happy to be invited by Laura and share what I can add into this presentation.
Thank you so much, Jim. So we're going to get started. And again, put questions in chats, take care of yourself as much as you need to, and then we'll have our live Q&A after we're done with the lecture. So let's jump in. I will be sharing slides here. All right. Here we are. Fire care, herbs for lungs and trauma. We want to make sure we go through the agenda so you know what to expect from us today. What does it mean to be a helper and a healer? What that person is someone that feels obligated and desires to support people in times of need. And if you're a helper, healer, herbalist, mutual aid supporter, this is a really important way to help yourself and to help others. So thank you so much for being here. How herbs can help in times of crisis. Air purifying methods, that's really essential. Jim and I agree that primarily try to breathe clean air. That's number one, right? So we'll give you a little bit of tools in order to have that be your first protective, and then how herbs can help as a secondary protective measure. Products available to buy easily, we talked about that. And then how all of these herbs, what these terms mean, what the definition of all of them are, and what's the most commonly found herbs that you can find that will support you in this time. First, what tools do you have that can help with air quality and breathing? Number one is an N95 mask. 95 means particulate. It's the amount of particulates can get through that mask. And smoke has very, very tiny particulate matter. And it gets into our lungs and into our bloodstream pretty quickly. So your first line of defense is a mask. If you have access to a HEPA filter, that is really important for your indoor air quality. You want to make sure to have that running at all times if you're in times of smoky air. There's also some pretty cool DIY air filters that even the Environmental Protection Agency has put slides together. So I have the slides for you. So these are the links you can send out, you can build yourself how to make your own air filter, especially in times of crisis when people are being displaced. Getting a box fan and getting a MERV 13 air filter and taping it to the box fan, just so the air is being circulated and filtered. I actually built one of these when I was redoing my store in San Francisco when I was resanding my floor. And I used one of these to circulate and filter the air because I couldn't afford one of those big ones or even rent a big one. Utilize this, get a few of them if you can. This is a link from the EPA that is in your resources for the slides. You can also go to the EPA to find this infographic and use it for yourself and for others. Oops. There we go. This is a more advanced one, meaning it includes a cardboard box or 4 filters. So feel free to look at the different levels of air quality. If you are in, right now, if you're in LA and working in mutual aid or working in as a first responder, making sure you're having some high quality ones as much as possible, or building some of these as much as you can in spaces. When the Tubbs fire was happening in Sonoma County and the Red Cross Center was there, it was open to the outside. It was very hard to get a lot of air filtration happening since the smoke was everywhere. So I know it's not an ideal situation for everyone. That's when the masks need to be worn indoors and outdoors if you're having to have those windows open at different times. Oops. All right. I am going to be going pretty quickly because we want to get deeper into each herb. So again, if you have any questions about anything we go over, you can ask them at the end. During times of crisis, there are actually products available at corner stores, at everyday grocery stores. You do not have to go to a specialty herbal apothecary to find some things. Walgreens, CVS, sometimes liquor stores have some of these products. Throat coat, it has slippery elm in it. We will talk about why demulcents are really important, but soothing, nourishing, getting that tissue supported is that first line of defense for smoky air and how it irritates tissue and gets into our body. I actually really love Bengal spice, celestial seasonings. It's one of my favorites. It has cinnamon in it, and cinnamon is a natural demulcent. It's gooey, but cinnamon also regulates blood sugar, which is fantastic. You would have to do a lot of it to get that to regulate blood sugar. It's a dosage thing on cinnamon, but it's a nourishing flavor. People love the flavor of chai. It's a really good, delicious tea, and it's readily available at Safeway, at Vons, at a lot of stores that don't carry natural products. So think about those types of products that you can get easily when you're looking for stuff. Honey. Honey is actually one of the demulcents that you can use all the time. It's soothing, it's delicious, it's sweet, it's also very cooling and nourishing for the body. It's that protective gooey layer that we want right now during times of smoky, smoky air. That is that first line of defense herbally. Lozenges are really good, keeping that throat moistened, especially if they're honey sweetened. Sometimes a lot of these herbs in there are going to also help a little bit aromatics and open up those lungs. We'll talk later about that. But making sure lozenges are available for folks too. This is also, if you're in times of crisis and stress, sweet makes you feel good. So use the sweet that's going to really help you in this time to protect those mucous membranes. That's inside the mouth. Those are the sinuses. That's the lungs. These are mucous membranes. They need mucus to protect themselves. And so that's what demulcents are really supportive of. I'm adding chamomile and peppermint tea here, specifically the generic brands that you can find, because often what I've seen is sometimes you can find a generic chamomile and peppermint tea at a gas station, at a corner store, where you use that. Use those herbs. Those are herbs. Those are herbal medicines. Use 5 tea bags in a tea, in a steam, in a bath. If you're looking to need herbs when you have a hard time finding them or even ordering them online. I'm sure right now shipping isn't happening in LA. I'm sure there's a lot of stopping of typical commerce. And so it is using whatever you can find. Great. All right. So this is the time to do what? Nourish your body, number one. Making sure you're eating as healthy as possible or as nourished as possible that you can. Rest is really important during times of crisis and stress. Sleep is always the first thing to go. And we want to make sure you're resting. Even if you're not sleeping, you're resting. Drink a lot of water. Hydration is really important during times of fires, as well as more specifically when there's smoke in the air. So feel free to offer water to folks, put honey in that water if you need to help people drink more of it. Getting water in your body is really important. And then connect with your community. This is also part of your community. So looking for people here, connecting deeper, we'll have time for that. Great. And then prioritize clean air. This is again going back to cleaning your air, being in clean air spaces as much as possible is your priority. And then the last one is a lot of the misinformation I've been seeing online these days is about detoxing right now. This is not the time to detox, not until you're out of the smoke, not until you're out of the crisis. This is not the time to detox. It is the time to nourish your body and support your system. And later, when the smoke is cleared, when the air is cleared, when you have vitality enough, when you're sleeping better, you can go through the detox process. Now, of course, if you have really congested lungs and you need to clear those, that's expectoration. That's not necessarily detoxification. So I just want to be really clear, as an herbalist, I do not recommend detoxing right now. Now, I'm going to go through some terms that some of you might have heard before, but I want to make sure you know what they mean so you know if an herb is in a category, how to utilize it for yourself or for your community. Adaptogens. What does that mean? Great question. Adaptogens help your body manage stress, help the body adapt to stress. That's where adaptogens are. But it actually does it on a cellular level. It does it through cortisol and managing cortisol, and that's the stress hormone. So it's really good when you're in time of crisis and afterwards when you're rebuilding your body after a time of extreme stress. Now, according to Donald Yance, who wrote Medical Adaptogens and Medical Herbalism, which there is a resource link at the end of the slides, he separates them between primary adaptogens, secondary, and adaptogen companions or tertiary. So I put them here as what are the primary adaptogens, the one that actually go in and really support that cortisol management, that cortisol mitigation, even metabolism, reducing it as quickly as possible. American ginseng is a lovely adaptogen, really supportive for actually cooling the lungs also, which is why I chose it here. Ashwagandha, which a lot of people know, it's pretty popular these days. It's actually more of a calming adaptogen. It helps with sleep, it helps rebuild your essence as you're sleeping and resting. It's not an energizing adaptogen. So that one's more for calming. And I really like eleuthero, which another name is Siberian ginseng. It's not a true ginseng, so they changed the name to a shortened version of its botanical name, Eleutherococcus senticosus. Eleuthero is a really great neutral adaptogen, helps with the immune system, helps manage that stress load. The other herbs that I know Jim is going to go into a little bit deeper later, shatavari, which is known as Ayurvedic ginseng or women's ginseng. And that one's a really lovely secondary adaptogen. Tulsi or holy basil is a lovely, delicious adaptogen. And a tertiary adaptogen or an adaptogen companion is hawthorn because it's so high in polyphenols as well as antioxidants. It's actually considered really restorative for the body and as a tertiary adaptogen. Nervines, a little different than adaptogens. Some adaptogens can act like nervines, but they're not technically nervines on their own. Nervines help calm the nervous system, often increasing GABA in the brain, which helps calm down that anxiety or that stress behavioral, ruminating thinking. Herbs to calm you down, to relax you. Chamomile, we love chamomile. It's one of our faves. Passion flower, really beautiful, really profoundly helpful herb. Leaf and flower you can use in the vine as well. Milky oats or oat seed. That's the aerial parts of the seed parts, and we'll go over that later. And hops. I love the botanical name of hops. Humulus lupulus. Now, if you're not a beer drinker, and a lot of people aren't drinking beer and alcohol these days, which is great, there's actually hop water, which I love, that has all of the benefits of hops, calms you down, but also doesn't have the alcohol in it. And it's a really helpful nervine that's common now at natural food stores or in different specialty shops. We're almost done with the categories here, and then we're going to keep going. Demulcents. This is really like Jim's area of expertise is demulcents. He gave a class at Scarlet Sage many moons ago on hacking and lungs. So goo. Demulcents are things with goo. So demulcents, if you made a tea of a demulcent, it would actually be filmy. These are long chain polysaccharides or things that have these yummy, gooey things, right? Actually, marshmallow root was the original marshmallow. They used marshmallow root to create marshmallows for, I believe it was when people were bootlegging gin in the medieval times in Europe. They were getting ulcers and they actually made marshmallow candies to heal their ulcers. And that's where marshmallow came from now. Now we don't have marshmallows with marshmallow in it anymore, but you can still make it. So demulcents are goo. They are going to soothe and nourish those mucous membranes. Aromatics. These are herbs that have strong smell. That's what aromatic means. So essential oils come from those leaves and flowers that are really strong and smelling, and we can extract them through distillation. So herbal aromatics generally have high essential oils in them. Some that smell strong do have chemicals that are aromatics, but not necessarily the essential oils. So here we have peppermint, cinnamon, tulsi, sage, rosemary, thyme. The list goes on and on. But the ones that are most common to use sometimes are culinary spices. So remember, your kitchen spices actually have a lot of medicinal properties. You can use some of those in this time. Now, one very strong distinction I want to make is the difference between lung relaxants and tonics and lung expectorants. The lungs are a very, very sensitive organ. They like stimulation, they like relaxation, they need to be nourished. They are our breath of life. It's really important to know when to use certain herbs and when not to use certain herbs. If you're in the middle of smoky air, you want to use lung tonics and relaxants. And these can help calm down the spasm, right? When someone has a dry cough and they cough and cough and cough all the time, these are going to help calm that down. So mullein is not a demulcent. Some people say it is. It's definitely not. It is a tonic. It's really supportive for helping breathing during times of smoky air, but also it's a neutral. People with asthma love mullein. They even smoke mullein. Mullein is a very long use herb, and it's really important to know when to use it. Wild cherry bark is considered a relaxant and a tonic. And in very low doses, lobelia is really important for as an antispasmodic. Only use it if you know exactly how to use it. If you overuse it, the side effect, it's an emetic and it'll make you throw up. So if you start feeling nauseous and you're using lobelia, it's because you've used too much. It is a very low dose botanical. I put it here because it's a common herb that people talk about when someone's quitting smoking. And it has a very similar molecular structure to nicotine. Lobelian is very similar to nicotine. So people use it a lot. So use it carefully, but it's an important herb to know how to use and make sure you understand the dose. And then the lung expectorants, they expel. Mucus is in the lungs, I want to get it out, you expel mucus. Elecampane. Isn't it interesting? Wild cherry bark is on the expectorant and the relaxant. It actually has both properties. What's so amazing about herbs is that they have hundreds, if not thousands, of chemical constituents. Some do both of things. They want to tone and cool. They want to nourish and dry out. There's these fascinating things that these herbs can do. And wild cherry bark is an interesting lung herb that it's used for dry and wet coughs. I would probably add a very specific expectorant or lung tonic to that if you want to dry out one or nourish one. Using lung expectorants are not encouraged at this time because they do open the lungs up for clean air to get in, not smoky air. So until you're in clean air, please hold off on expectorants. Now, how do we use those chamomile tea bags? Jim and I both love using chamomile tea bags to cleaning the eyes. So when you are working out there in the smoky air, you're walking, you're not generally wearing goggles, right? Eyes are getting irritated from the smoke. One of the things that I've used for many, many first aid remedies, including a sty in the eye or a piece of something in the eye, is chamomile tea bags. So how you use it, put a chamomile tea bag in a cup of water, just like you would make any tea bags, tea. Steep it for 5 minutes. Take the tea bag out and let it cool down. I promise you do not want to put a boiling hot tea bag on your eye. Once it's cool, meaning you can touch it with your hand, you can put that tea bag that's already been steeped on your eye as a poultice. And putting it on your eye, you can lie down, let someone rest, and you can have them drink that chamomile tea to calm down. Now, what that also does is gives you the tea that once it's cool, you can use as an eye wash. And I believe Jim has an eye wash remedy for chamomile tea that he would like to share.
Yeah, I really love, I mean, in general, if I think about eye washes, if something is strongly aromatic, it might be a little bit stingy in your eye. So like I don't want to put, I mean, I certainly don't want to put, although it's a tradition, cayenne in my eye, personally. I don't want to put thyme in my eye. Peppermint in my eye also makes me feel like that. So I think about aromatic herbs. I think like not a whole lot, but chamomile is really perfect because it's gently aromatic. It's quite aromatic, but it's gentle in its nature. And what I often do is make a tea that's like maybe chamomile and plantain together. And then I can make the tea. So if you're using tea bags, of course, Laura already mentioned, it should be steaming, definitely not bubbling, definitely not steaming before, test it before you put it on your eye. But also like if it's a tea bag, does it have a staple in it? You might want to take that out. Um, you can use the tea bag as a poultice. You can put a washcloth or a cotton ball in your tea and use it as a poultice or a compress. You can, if you need to rinse something out of your eye, and you have a dropper or even like just a small measuring cup or something, you can use it as a rinse. And not many people, very few people have eye cups, Even a lot of herbalists I know don't have eye cups, but a lot of people do have swimming goggles. And so one thing you can do if your eyes are really irritated is pour some into, one or both of the swimming goggles. Put it on your face. You have to put your head down and, put the goggles on your face and strap it on. And then just like let that tea kind of sit in your eye. Now, when you make tea, you're going to put it onto your eyeball. It's a good idea to strain it through a coffee filter. If you had like bulk herbs, chamomile has lots of little chamomile pieces in it that'll go through a wire strainer. So a coffee filter is really important to use. And then also if for every, 8 fluid ounces, every cup of tea, you can add about a quarter teaspoon of salt. That'll make it a saline or an isotonic solution, and it'll just feel a little bit better on your eyes. It won't feel like you're getting water on your eyes. If you put too much salt on, it'll sting, so don't do that. But the goggle trick is really helpful because sometimes you want that prolonged contact with your eyes if your eyes are really irritated. If you had smoke in them for a long period of time because you've been out and you're blinking and you're basically just rubbing the smoke particles around in your iris, on your eyeballs, that the ability to have the goggles holding that tea in place and soothing your eyes can really be very helpful. The video that I have on YouTube that's linked to in this goes through a long process of different options and different ways that you can make that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I actually have found that this is one of the easiest things for people to do right away. They often have chamomile in their cupboard, or if they're staying at a friend's house, their friend might have chamomile in their cupboard. It's a pretty common, I mean, Trader Joe sells chamomile tea. So it is one of those herbs that's the most easily available. Another use for chamomile before we move on, because I'm so excited to hear what Jim has to say about marshmallow root, is that some people have been asking about babies and the use of herbs for infants or babies at this time. Chamomile is an amazing herb for children. You can make a strong tea, 3 to 5 tea bags, let it steep for 10-15 minutes, put that in a bath and let that cool down and put them in that bath. It's going to calm them down. They're going to smell it. Those very, very light essential oils that chamomile has, it has essential oils. That's why it smells so good, are going to help calm and nourish, but it's safe for the baby. It's safe for any children of any age. I believe Matthew Wood says chamomile is good for any child of any age. So if you're feeling irritated, if you're feeling stressed out, if you're feeling overwhelmed, use this for yourself. Use it as a wash, use it, drink it, use it as an eye wash, but also put it in a steam if you need it, and that will help calm you down as well. So this is the only herb that I would recommend for anyone under 2. If I don't know what's really going on with them specifically and treating them one-on-one, it's a really good herb for babies. So if they're irritated, they have colic, they're not sleeping, they're, feeling the stress of the family and things around them, use chamomile. Great. Now, one of the key happies of the world of demulcents is marshmallow. Jim has a wonderful recipe. This is the basics for a cold infusion. Now, marshmallow root has long polysaccharides, so it makes it really gooey, right? And so you actually want to infuse it in cold water. Hot water can break those molecular structures, so it actually makes it less gooey. We want to keep those together. And so you put cold infusion, meaning 2 tablespoons per cup of water. Obviously, increase that when you make a quart. And you're going to steep that overnight, and then you can strain it. I'm using bulk marshmallow root at this point, but there are a few companies that do marshmallow tea bags. It's pretty hard to find. So if you can get bulk marshmallow root, it's really important to be able to know how to do a marshmallow cold infusion. Now, this is Jim's recipe. I will have him take over from here.
All right. So, I've got kids and well, my youngest child is 12 now. But when my oldest child was just a kid and people started learning as an herbalist, they'd say things like, they'd ask me questions and all that. And I was like, oh, I've got a really good cocoa recipe. And a basic cocoa recipe, if you want something that has honey but not sugar in it, is like a quart of water, about a third cup of unsweetened cocoa powder. You have to get good unsweetened cocoa powder. If you make it with Hershey's unsweetened cocoa powder, it will be as disappointing as all Hershey's chocolate. Sorry if I've wrecked our chances for a Hershey's discount. And then like a fourth to a third cup of honey. And in this situation, I would use more honey because the honey is also acting as a moistening part of the preparation. So even though you might think like, oh, it's sugar, it's sweet, I want to cut back on that. When we're using it and we're adding it for a medicinal use, that makes sense. And then you just put that in water and you heat it up just to sipping temperature. And it's pretty amazing. But then I started playing off of that, and I was like, well, if I want to tweak it in different directions, I could add stuff not just for flavor, but if someone has a dry cough, or in this situation, if they're inhaling a lot of smoke, which is drying out their lungs because the very dry smoke is coming into contact with their lung tissue and sucking the moisture out of their lung tissue and into the smoke and sticking there like a film. You can make a cold infusion of marshmallow rather than just using straight water, and you have moistening demulcent cocoa. And I know some people might think like, oh, marshmallow infusion gets pretty thick and super gooey, but because you're consuming it at a warmer temperature, it'll be a little bit thinner, and the flavor works. Um, Parents would tell me like, I'm so glad like you do all this stuff for your kids. I was like, I made this cocoa recipe for me. That was like totally, I made it before I had kids. That's because I wanted cocoa. And then I started tweaking it. If we're in a situation where someone's sick, we can add elderberry syrup to it, some propolis tincture. There's all kinds of directions you can take it. But a lot of times, maybe you're dealing with someone who, although this sounds silly to me to say because I'm an herbalist, they say like, I don't like tea. I don't want to drink tea. This tastes weird. It's unfamiliar. And familiarity is really important because if, a lot of people who are not into herbs are affected by wildfire smoke. Anyone in the area is affected by wildfire smoke. And we might be asking them to do something and mentioning herbs that they've never heard of. And that can create some apprehension. And if you say, oh, marshmallow, everyone's heard of that. Cocoa, everyone's heard of that. Most people like cocoa. And if they don't like cocoa, I'm sure, although I haven't made it yet, you could make like a carob buzz, you know? No, it's not really fair to carob to make it a cocoa substitute, but this is a really nice formula. It can be really helpful for children or people who aren't into teas or aren't into unfamiliar things. It's just familiar and comforting. And chocolate, it increases endorphins. It can make people like kind of feel a little bit up in a time when things are very hard.
Thank you so much for that. I was thinking too that a chai with honey and marshmallow might be a good option too for folks that don't like chocolate. I know every now and then, which surprises me as well, someone doesn't like chocolate, but it seems like chai is a good alternative that will still, support folks. Great. Thank you so much for that. I can't wait to try it. All you, Jim.
Oh, it's on me. It's my turn. Yay, woohoo. Um, Plantain, the first thing to say, we're talking about the common weed plantain and not the thing that if you don't look at close enough, it looks like a banana. That is not the plantain we're talking about. That other plantain, the fruit, is wonderful, but it's not what we're talking about right now. Plantain is a very common weed. It grows throughout a lot of North America. It is something that thrives on and it's hard to say this, but it sort of thrives on environmental damage. When people disturb the ground and they walk on it too much time and they compact the soil, that is the kind of habitat that plantain really likes. So it's very commonly available. A lot of people, when I initially show them what it is, their first thought is like, oh, that grows right outside my door. And the herbs that grow right outside your door are the most important herbs to sort of learn about and know about. If you know about really amazing, super cool herbs that do really amazing, super cool things, and they don't grow anywhere near you, those plants are still really cool and amazing, but they're less accessible. And one of the great things about plantain is it's not only accessible, but it's super sustainable to gather. You pick the leaves, new leaves grow back. You can keep picking it all throughout the year. It doesn't need to be gathered at a particular time of the year. So anywhere between the time that the leaves come out well, I live in Michigan. So in the springtime until the fall, you can use them. There's not like a season that it is like, oh, you have to get it in this season. If you live in a place where there's not a winter that makes it kind of die back, then it's available more often. It is commonly available in commerce as a dried herb. So if you have access to that, that's pretty wonderful too. And for me, this is like a great base herb to making a tea, maybe a tincture blend that you're going to use for dealing with the complications of smoke inhalation. Because it's a little bit demulcent, it's a little bit astringent, and it has this drawing actions. One of the things that it's most commonly and most popularly known for is as something you would put on a bug bite or a bee sting to sort of like presumably somehow sort of like pull the venom out of you and make everything, less problematic. But it can also help to sort of, and I admittedly will struggle with explaining the physiology of this. It helps to loosen and pull out stuck mucus. And that is often a part of what is happening is when we inhale a lot of smoke, it lands on our mucus, it thickens it up, and it makes it's stuck there. And so the drawing quality that plantain has helps to release that stuck mucus and allow us to cough it up and get it out of us. So that's a very important aspect of it. To me, this is like a starting place for where I'm going to start dealing with a lot of the respiratory teas or tincture that I make. It's like the first ingredient that I lay down before I put other things on top of it. All right. Um, mullein. So I have to admit, I'm one of the people, I'm going to throw mullein into the demulcent category. Um, and that's okay. So let me just add to a little bit of how I'm going to frame the thought about demulcents. So I think about demulcents as moistening herbs. And then in Western herbalism, almost all of our demulcents, we call them demulcents because they're rich in mucilage, meaning you mix them with water, they get slimy. And if we go into other traditions, we start to see that there's other herbs that in Western herbalism we call demulcents, but they don't really get slimy. And the best example of this is you see a list of demulcents in a Western herbal, and licorice is in there. And licorice gets a little bit filmy, but it's not slimy, it's super sweet. So when I think of demulcents, I think moistening herb, and I break them up into kind of two subcategories. There's slimy demulcents and sweet demulcents. And the slimy demulcents, we're going to kind of keep going on. But the sweet demulcents would be like licorice is a great example. Shatavari is a great example. Bland and slightly sweet and a little bit of slime there. The Chinese herb Codonopsis, which I love so much, is a great example of a sweet demulcent. American ginseng is a moistening sweet demulcent as well as being adaptogen. And I think we can even put honey into this category. So when we add honey to our tea, we're not just adding it to make it sweeter or to, quote unquote, taste better. We're adding it because it's acting as a sweet moistening substance. It's not an herb, but a substance that's adding to the moistening quality of the tea that we're drinking. When we're thinking about demulcents, whether they're sweet or whether they're slimy, another thing we think about is the degree to which they are. And with slimy stuff, this is really easy. Slippery elm and marshmallow and Irish moss, or people call it sea moss, even though sea moss means a bunch of different seaweeds. They're really slimy when you mix them with water. They get super gooey. And then if we thought about like violet leaves or sassafras leaves or malva leaves, like a mallow leaf, not a marshmallow leaf, but could be. They're less demulcent, they're less slimy, but they're still slimy. And then once we get into plantain, and then I would say, for my opinion too, mullein, they have mucilage in them, but they also have so much other stuff going on that they're still demulcents, but they're a lot like less in terms of the degree to which they are demulcents. So we want to think about that in a situation where we are thinking about wildfires and dealing with the impact of wildfire smoke. We want to be thinking this is causing a lot of dryness, so I need to have the more overtly higher degree slimy stuff in there. So if I'm using something like plantain, I also want to use something maybe like marshmallow to add more slime to it. Now, one of the things that is really interesting and possibly confusing is that the slimy mucilage that you might associate with marshmallow, or that maybe if you're less familiar with herbs, you might associate with okra. Oh, you know what you can use? Okra. Okra is a demulcent. If you have access to okra, you could make tea out of that. It's really green and it's very okra tasting. If you cook okra and you cut off the thin pointy end and then the little stem end and save those and dry them out, those get pretty goopy. I dehydrate those and save those and add them to things. So if okra is a way that you're familiar with slime, and not some of these other herbs I'm mentioning, that works too. Um, that mucilage, that slimy water-based substance does not actually get into our lungs, right? Because in order for it to get into our lungs, it had to be absorbed through our intestinal wall into our bloodstream. And because our blood is mostly water, it would make our blood all slimy. And that doesn't really happen. So the physiology of how mucilaginous, slimy demulcent herbs moisten lung tissue is kind of not fully known. A lot of herbalists will say, and this is a reasonable thing to say, is there's some kind of reflex reaction, something when we taste and when we consume mucilaginous plants creates a reflex reaction which moistens other mucous membranes in distant places of the body that they don't actually touch. Maybe scientifically, it's because we have goo-p receptors, goo-p receptors, and it stimulates, things via slimy pathways. Um, Maybe it's slime fairies. I don't really know. Reflex reaction kind of works. But it's pretty well established that demulcent herbs don't only work where the mucilage comes into direct contact, which would be your digestive tract, but also in your urinary tract, in your reproductive mucosa, and in your respiratory tissue. And this is well established all throughout the world and all traditions of herbalism. People use demulcent herbs to moisten the lungs and respiratory tissues. Um, why are demulcents so important when we have smoke inhalations? So if you've ever spilled anything, maybe in your garage, there's an oil spill or you spill something and you throw some kitty litter on there, that dry kitty litter soaks the moisture up out of the, maybe the surface of your concrete, and then it kind of sticks there, right? And so when we inhale all of this smoke, and smoke is always hot and dry because stuff got burned up. All the moisture got burned out of it. It's hot because of fire. And it lands on our lung tissues. It pulls some of the moisture out of our lung tissues, but then it kind of stays stuck on there, right? And sometimes I think about, actually, I started using this analogy a couple of years ago. Like, I make oatmeal in the morning, and I look at the pot that I made the oatmeal in, and I think, I'll clean that up later. And then I come back later, and that oatmeal is stuck to the side of the pot. It does not want to let go. And I could really scrub at it and I could kind of like try to do things to force it off. But the best way to get it to release is to add moisture back to it. So it wants to like re-moisten, it'll come off a lot more easily. And this applies to tissues in the lungs too. We use demulcents, they moisten respiratory tissue, and then that mucus will like be able to be removed from the lungs more effectively. So mullein is very mildly demulcent. And when I think of like what does mullein cough sound like? It's kind of like it has that wheezy sound to it. If I hear that, and that's a sound that if someone has really damp lung congestion, you can't make that sound. Um, so that's an indication. If I hear that, I think of mullein. And mullein is also a spectacular respiratory relaxant. So if when people are coughing, their cough sounds like and that hard coughing leaves their chest really, really sore, and it's just hurting. Mullein is spectacular for that. And mullein and plantain, they just go together so well. It's like such a great combination. So they're really nice. One thing I want to address before we move on is that there's a long tradition of taking mullein and smoking it for respiratory issues. That is not going to be appropriate when you're dealing with smoke inhalation, right? Um, when you take an herb and you light it on fire and you inhale the burning embers of that herb, no matter what the qualities or energetics of that, even if it was the most, like if it was watermelon and it's super moistening and super cooling, you lit it on fire, you're inhaling the hot burning embers, it's always hot and dry. And that's going to be aggravating. It might still have an antispasmodic effect, but it's really just not what we need to do. And I know because there's a gazillion mullein groups on Facebook and everyone's like, smoke mullein, it's the best way to use it. It doesn't make sense to do when we're dealing with wildfires. We don't need to add more ash into our lungs. Okay, next plant. Let's see what's here. Oh, milky oats. Not really quite a demulcent. It is slightly moistening. It's got a starchy quality. And so, like, if we think about different kinds of traditions in herbalism, and they talk about the sweet flavor, usually sweet, say, like in Chinese medicine, it's overtly sweet things and includes slimy things because it's got polysaccharides and includes sort of like blander, starchy things. And that's where the oat seed would fall in, but very, very mildly and gently moistening. Milky oats is not so much an adaptogen because technically it's not working on the HPA axis, but it is a nervine tonic. It is a nutritive. And when you're using milky oats, and especially if you're using it daily over a prolonged period of time, um, I think the word that I like most for it is that it's sustaining. When a situation is hard and it's going to stay hard for a long time, and you want something that's really going to be supportive, a nervine tonic or a nervine tropho-restorative, that's a big word for a nervine tonic, is going to be really, really helpful. And kind of like when I said earlier, if I'm thinking about a respiratory, tea or tincture blend, I'm going to start with plantain and think what I'm going to add on top of that. When I'm thinking about a tea or tincture blend that I'm going to use for ongoing stress, includes trauma, uh, milky oats is definitely something I'm going to favor and sort of like be a starting place. A couple caveats. One caveat is while oats do not contain gluten, oats do not contain gluten. There may be cross-contamination in processing. So when you see gluten-free oats, that's what they're testing for. I've heard that there may be like, wheat pollen from farming lands on it. I think it would be hard for that to be a true contaminant, but let's just include that as a possibility. But really, it's more of an issue because some people who are sensitive to gluten aren't only sensitive to gluten, they're sensitive to grain proteins. And oats does not have gluten, but it does have a grain protein called avenin in it. And some people may have cross reactivity. That's not the majority of people, but it is some people. So that's something to be mindful of. If we are thinking about like the tea of the dried milky oat tops versus the tincture of the fresh milky oat tops, the tincture of the fresh milky oat tops is less nutritive, but more of a nervine tropho restorative. And the tea of the dried tops is more of a nutritive and has less of the nervine tropho restorative action. But it's a really important herb, and it is also gentle outside of the potential of grain proteins being an issue. There is no one that I would not recommend milky oats to. Okay, let's see what's next. It's exciting for me. Hawthorn. Hawthorn is not just a heart tonic for people who have heart failure or hypertension or all of the different physiological heart things. In the reason for its inclusion here is this a really good herb, and maybe we can call it a nervine. Maybe the word nervine is a little bit too small for what it does. But when I think about people dealing with loss and emotional hardship and grief and sort of that like emotional trauma, that really heart-sick trauma of something happening, of being displaced, of maybe losing your home, or maybe just being separated from your home, of worrying about your friends and families. And this is outside of people directly affected by this. There are a lot of people that are very worried about their friends and family on this deep emotional level. And Hawthorn is very soothing to that. And it adds some ease for emotional grief and hardship and trauma. Um, if you're using the berries, you could use tea, you could use tincture, you could make syrups out of it. There's all different kinds of ways you can use the berries. If you are making a tea with it, it's a little bit funky tasting. If you have really good quality hawthorn, there's a little bit of a fecundity to it, or maybe it's slightly rank. The flowers are pollinated by flies, so it's not like the most floral, great tasting tea in the world. Um, but the berries are really pretty wonderful. And can be made in all kinds of different preparations. A lot of times, most of the time, if I'm thinking about something where someone's dealing with a lot of emotional hardship, I'm starting with milky oats and I'm thinking I'm going to add some hawthorn to that. And then there will be, at least one most of the time, or a few other herbs that are indicated for the way that that person is responding to that stress, that trauma, that hardship.
I'd love to add something, Jim, if that's okay. I also just want to say if someone does, because Hawthorn does reduce blood pressure, and if someone is on blood pressure medication, to be careful about dosage here with Hawthorn. We want to do much smaller doses, much higher doses. We do see blood pressure dropping. So just in case there are some folks that are on meds in this room, or if you're treating people with heart issues, just do your research on dosage with Hawthorn. A cup of tea is fine. Just higher
Mhm.
doses in tincture or higher doses in larger amounts of tea. Let's say it's a quart of tea, someone's really excited about it, drinking it every day. Just be aware, work with a clinical herbalist if you're working with someone that has some heart issues with Hawthorn.
A lot of books and resources that you'll find online, if you look for contraindications, the main thing that it'll list is if you're taking digitalis, it may require you to adjust your dose of digitalis. I don't actually meet a lot of people taking digitalis-based medicines. And where I've seen some funkiness to it, which where it hasn't really been reported, and some people have been like, that doesn't really happen, is when people like if there's one class of blood pressure medications that this seems to interact with, not all the time at all, and not most of the time, it's beta blockers. And I initially learned that from Alice Ann Carlton. I always props out to that because like I heard about it from her, and then the first time I had someone who was reacting adversely long decades ago. To Hawthorne, it was a beta blocker issue, and they tried capsules, they tried teas, they tried tinctures, and it was like they just could not use the two of them together. And although we don't have a slide for it, there are other herbs that are cardiac herbs. One of them that I really love that covers a lot of the same ground and is actually a demulcent. I don't know that it's a heart demulcent. I don't know quite how to wrap my head around I have some ideas, but I don't know for like really solidly how to wrap my head around the idea of heart demulcents or cardiovascular demulcents. But it is a demulcent herb. Selenocereus grandiflorus or Cactus grandiflorus is the old Latin name for it you would find in old books. And that herb was also used as a nervine tonic. It was the stems of the night blooming cereus, and there are other species of night blooming cereus, but it was like one of the key indications for it was like intense fear. Like I'm so fearful right now. I'm so fearful about my health. And because it's often framed in the situation of like heart disease, it's like I'm afraid I'm going to die from my heart disease. But I've also used it for situations where people are just really scared about the situation that they're in and think that it can be really pretty wonderful. It's not commonly found in commerce. You have to use the fresh plant. Herb Farm makes cactus tincture, and David Winston's company, Herbalist and Alchemist, makes cactus tincture. Those would be two reliable sources where you know you would be getting the right species and a good preparation. Oh, passion flower. So passion flower is beautiful. It's really weedy and super sustainable. It is a calming herb, and one of the things that passion flower is really spectacular for is like you get into these stuck thought patterns of like your brain just won't stop. And sometimes those brain won't stop thinking is like worry, 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 worry. What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? But it can also be like your brain just won't turn off. And I know in a situation like this, a lot of people are worried, but also a lot of people they're just stuck in like planning, compensating, coping, figuring out mode. And they can't relax because they're like, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. I got to figure out what I'm going to do. I got to figure out what I'm going to do. I have to figure this change, that change, what's going on. I got like they can't turn off. And when they can't turn off, they can't relax. And even when it seems like, how could I possibly relax? We need to take those opportunities when we can get them. And this can help to slow down the thoughts. There was an herbalist in London named Christopher Headley. He passed away some years ago, but he used to say mice in the brain, right? Your brain is just so active and it won't stop. And so you can't sleep because your brain won't turn off. Passion flower is one of the things that I would think of. Passion flower is also really helpful for people who are very emotionally open and empathic and they're just picking up on just all of the stress and worries and trauma of all the people around them. There's an herbalist in Chicago named Althea Northridge Orr. She has a PDF handout online. We should try to find that for the resources, where she talks about different nervines. And she's the one who first introduced me to this particular use of passion flower, which I had never heard of before. And it really pans out. So for people who are just feeling overwhelmed by their openness and their sensitivity, passion flower can help maybe establish filters, or can help with when you're trying to sort out like what's yours and what you've picked up and is not really yours and you can't do anything about. It can make that process a little bit easier and not something that we get stuck and fixated on. Okay, next herb. What do we got next? Oh, violet. I feel like that about all the plants. Oh, this plant, oh, that plant. So violet is a demulcent herb. It's a slimy demulcent herb. If you're using sweet violet, Viola odorata, it also has some of that sweetness when you're using the flowers that come along with it. A lot of people, when they think about violet, they think about the flowers. The leaves are nutritive. The leaves are slimier than the flower. They have more mucilage in them. And they also have a lot of lymphatic involvement. So I can use violet leaves a lot like I would use plantain or like I would use mullein. But in addition to that, the violet leaves have maybe like a more pronounced lymphatic action. So if I'm working with someone and they have this dry cough that is associated with smoke inhalation and the heat and the irritation from all the particles, we're going to get the moistening action that helps really. Yeah. Okay. Um, The violet helps to release all of that, or loosen and allow you to get that smoke out of your lungs. But also, a lot of people, they might have like a lot of inflammation and soreness in the back of their throat because they're inhaling this smoke. It's creating an irritant on their mucosa, and they're talking and coughing. And if we've got a dry cough and our throat is really dry and our tonsils are swollen and our lymph glands are swollen, the violet can be really helpful for addressing both of those things at the same time. I really feel like as much as possible, when we find an herb that does more than one thing that we need all in one herb, rather than one herb for this and another herb for that and another herb for that, the more a single plant does that is appropriate to what our body needs, the more indicated that plant is for what is going on with us. Also, violet's just delicious. It's a wonderful to eat. It's wonderful to make tea with. Strongly nutritive. You can make tincture with it, and the tincture will be helpful. I know that a lot of people, when they think about tinctures of demulcent herbs, they'll say like, oh, but alcohol does not extract mucilage very well, and so it's, not going to act as a demulcent. But the mucilage doesn't get to our lungs anyway. And some of the mucilage will come out because if we're extracting fresh plants with water, I'm sorry, if we're extracting fresh plants with alcohol, even very high proof alcohol, it's also extracting the water and the water soluble constituents along with it, and that will get into the tincture. So violet, really wonderful choice, especially when there's sore throats, swollen glands, and inflammation. On to our next plant. Oh, hey. Woohoo. I think we're at discussion time.
We're at discussion time now, Jim. Thank
Oh, I
you
love discussion time.
so much. We'll stop the slides for now. Happy to go back to them if needed. But thank you. Look at that. We are only 5 minutes over, which means we're exactly at an hour because we started about 5 minutes after the hour. Thank
It's
you.
almost, we did that on purpose. How did that happen?
Oh, I don't know. You and I have done this a couple times, I think, maybe one or twice, once or twice. We are open for questions. Claire, are there any questions that you've seen in the chat that are pretty consistent or that we can answer right away before we open it up?
Yeah, I do have a couple. What I've got a question that asks if she's got a hard time drinking bitter teas and adds honey to like most teas, and is wondering if there's any teas or herbs where honey is contraindicated.
That's a really good question. I'll jump in, Jim, please add. The only
Okay.
reason why honey would ever be contraindicated would be if you have too much mucus or if you're really sensitive to honey or sugar and you're really looking at lowering your sugar intake or not wanting that demulcent property that honey has. But bitters we know are good for stimulating digestion, helping the liver detox, really irritating certain tissues and gastric juices. So we like the bitter taste. And if that's a hard one and we need to add a sweetener to it, you're going to get a little less of that bitter action, and that's in quotes. But it's more about balancing that out so it's compliant. I think our biggest competitor in the world of herbalism is compliance. So if honey gets you that bitter tea that gets it down the pie hole, we're happy to have it there. So Jim, I'll pass it over to you if you have.
Yeah, I think because I'm obsessed with bitters as are most herbalists, and no, the biggest pretty much just what Laura said is like if people don't eat bitters because they don't like the way they taste, and honey will change that. Um, do that because then you're getting the bitter. I think when I first started learning about herbs in the mid 90s, people used to say like, "Oh, if you sweeten up the bitters, they'll stop working." And that's subsequently become like not really true. We have bitter taste receptors not just on our tongue, but all throughout our digestive tract. And if it doesn't work on one, it'll activate another. Um, Maybe a thought that I have is there's lots of different bitters, and sometimes the when people think about bitters, they think I have to have something that makes me like grimace and is horrible. And, like I've had some pretty like, oh, there's an herbalist in Virginia, Maryland area. I should know which one. I stayed there, named Betsy Miller, and she made this concentrated like coffee bitters where she like really evaporated down the coffee and had a little bit of honey, and it was amazing. I've had dark chocolate bitters, I've had citrus bitters, and so like if you can find bitters that you like that work for you. Roasted dandelion root with like chaga and orange peel and cinnamon. You can make that taste really good. If you find the bitters you like, they're not as hard to drink. And if you're like, oh, andrographis is like one of the strongest bitters, or cryptolepis is one of the strongest bitters, so that's going to use because then I think that it works better because it's stronger. Um, that would just be harder to do. And just a quick thought that overlaps in different things is a lot of times we frame herbs as being like stronger, like there's an herb that's stronger than another herb, but then that also frames the other herb as being weaker than an herb that's stronger. And I think if we think about that more as like there are herbs that act more forcefully and herbs that are more gentle in the way that they work, we won't think that gentle herbs are weak because gentle does not mean weak. That's not what it means. It just means that they won't kind of push you as much. And as a general philosophy, I want to kind of start with gentle and use things that are more forceful according to need rather than thinking like, oh, if I use something more forceful, it'll work faster or better. It might work faster, but not necessarily better.
Thank you, Jim. It looks like we have a few questions. Yes, you can use these slides for infographics for folks if you need it, like the chamomile tea bag, the wash, all of them are available for you. They're a free resource, so please use them, make them your own. If you can tag us if you want to, it's really up to you. This is common use and common knowledge, a lot that we're sharing. So please use that. Another question, can you suggest parts of a tea if making a tea with mullein, plantain, marshmallow root, and passion flower equal parts? That's a really good question. We didn't give a recipe on how to use a lung tea. So I'm going to give a rule of thumb here. When you're making a tea with roots, you usually boil them down. In herbalism, we call that a decoction. So you boil them down like the simmering water. You're boiling it for about 15 minutes, about a tablespoon per cup of the roots for that cup of water. It's going to boil it down to a smaller cup, right? It's less than a full cup. But then when you're steeping herbs, that's flowers, stems, leaves, you don't boil it. You let it sit in a regular cup of tea or like a cup of coffee. It just sits in hot water. So if you're blending herbs that we've suggested today, roots and leaves and flowers and aerial parts, you want to boil the roots down first. And then when those are done, 10 to 15 minutes later, you can add in the leaves and the flowers if you're using bulk herbs. Now, the rule of thumb, again, is about a tablespoon per cup. And that's, again, a rule of thumb. It's a pretty wide range of teaspoon to 3 tablespoons based on how strong you want to make it. Most bulk herbs that you can get do have some suggestions on those websites, do have recipes on those websites. Feel free to go deeper into that. There's some really good herbalists out there in the world that are sharing a lot of their recipes. So once again, if you're mixing the herbs, you can definitely mix them. Something to be highly aware of. Mullein has tiny little hairs on it. Tiny little hairs. And if you are using mullein, bulk mullein, and you open that bag to put it in a tea bag, you are going to get itchy. You are going to start coughing. It gets into the mouth and the lungs. It is so horrific. I even have had used masks when using mullein in bulk. So if you're using mullein as a bulk tea, prepare for that. Prepare using gloves, using a mask. Just be aware that it has to be a really fine tea bag, like a sieve or a coffee filter. I love that idea because you really need to filter out those tiny little hairs that can be very irritating to your dry tissue. So mullein is a beast in and of itself. It's an amazing herb, but you can get very itchy with mullein.
Yeah, I would add to that. One of my favorite tools for like, I do the first pass of a strain through a wire filter and squeeze out everything. But if it's got mullein in it, um, a coffee filter, one thing you can do is you have a mason jar and a coffee filter, and the mason jar has a ring. You put the coffee filter kind of like in there, and you can close the ring around the coffee filter to hold it in place, and then pour the tea through there. That's a little bit tedious. If you have access to like a pour over tea filter that people or pour over coffee filter that people use, where it's a cone shaped filter and it sits comfortably on top of a mason jar, that works great. Kind of my favorite, it's not a discovery, but like I started using those Chemex filters where it's like the cone and it kind of looks like a weird chemical vase. The filter goes on top, you pour the stuff through, and then it's really easy to pour out of that. But yeah, you want to use a coffee filter if there's mullein in there. It's not that everyone will react to the little hairs in the tea, but some people will. And if it's something that they're not familiar with and they feel scratchy at the back of their throat, it could cause them to panic. It could cause them to think like, oh, wait, am I reacting to this? Am I allergic to this? And we don't want to do that. And importantly, sometimes people will be like, oh, well, I do this all the time and it doesn't bother me. But you might just have less sensitive mucosa, and someone else might have more sensitive mucosa, or someone who's been dealing with smoke inhalation might have more sensitive mucosa because of the other irritants, and the mullein hair is just added on top of that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Great.
There, there was a question earlier that I would love for you guys to address. Aurora Lavender Hazelwood asked, is it enough to wash a plant that has been growing outside that has been exposed to smoke, ash, other toxic things floating in the air?
I would say no. Let's not use plants that are in the middle of a wildfire, only because plants breathe. They,
Mhm.
they they need oxygen to live, just like we do, and they are ingesting that toxic smoke, which, as we know, when houses and other things are burning, not just the forest, I'm putting that in quotes, it's just as devastating, but there's more toxic chemicals in the air, and so we don't want to use those plants locally, unfortunately. The goal would be to use plants that are outside of smoky areas, or regrow after a season of smoke. That's totally appropriate. But no, we wouldn't be using the ones that are hyper local right now, sadly and unfortunately. I do know that someone asked about overuse right now. All of the herbs that we've listed are not considered what we call low dose botanicals, except lobelia. You could drink a gallon of mullein and probably be like, oh, that makes me want to pee a lot or doesn't make me feel great. You're not going to have any adverse reactions. Hawthorn, once again, high doses can lower the heart rate, right? Be aware of that. But all of the herbs we presented to you today are extremely safe in very high doses, unless you're using a hyper super critical concentrated capsule version of it that you would be taking 30 capsules of, right? There's some limits that we have with, we're talking a lot about teas today, even making syrups, putting things in honey. These are very easy to get the dosage you need, but also not overuse them. I don't know, Jim, if you have anything more to share about dosage.
Yeah, you know, dosage is a complicated thing because I I think that we often think because all the bottles come with dosages on them, right? We often think that plants have dosages. And really, for me, I think about three things at least. And one is different plants have dosage ranges. So mullein has a huge dosage range. You're Matthew Wood and you're using 3 to 5 drops of mullein tincture. You live in the UK and you're taking mullein tincture in teaspoons, a few times a day. You might go through an ounce in a day or two. So mullein has a huge dosage range. Lobelia has a small dosage range. So it's like a drop to maybe like 5 drops, and a few times a day or as needed, but you're not taking 30 drops of mullein. So the first thing to think about is the dosage range that an individual plant has. The next thing to think about is the person who's taking that plant. Just like some people are more sensitive to coffee or more sensitive to alcohol or more sensitive to conventional medications or less sensitive, people are more or less sensitive to herbs. And so some people, if they're more sensitive, they're at the lower end of that dosage range. And if they're a lot, I always don't want to say insensitive, less sensitive, if they're like it takes a lot to stuff to work for them, they tend to be at the higher ends of the dosage range.
Yeah.
And then the third factor is what's the situation that's going on and how does that dictate whether we might need to, work with a higher or lower dosage, so sometimes it's like, oh, I would use a higher dosage of something for an acute situation, like really get on top of it, like echinacea if someone has a cold, but if someone has like chronic eruptive boils, I'd have a lot less echinacea in a smaller proportion in the formula that they would take over a longer period of time. So those three considerations together are how I figure out dosage. But the first most important thing to think about is what is the dosage range of this plant? Because lobelia is not mullein. And even though I think a lot of people, if they look at the average bottle, it says take, 30 to 40 drops 2 or 3 times a day, and that's on most of the bottles. We need to be mindful of things like mullein or things like poke or these low dose botanicals that just don't have that same kind of dosage range.
Thank you so much. I think the resources, if you don't know, there are some great books that we're adding in the slides for resources. Look at your herb books. Look at the ones that say dosage. They'll have specific dosage per herb. And so I want you to rely, if you have a question about something, rely on the clinical herbalists that write books, that have blogs that you'll be able to resource if you really do want to know these questions. Thank you so much for asking it. We have a couple questions about TCM, and I have a dear friend in the room. Her name's Erin Masako Wilkins, who we have invited to help with the Q&A on the TCM perspective. Erin is a friend and a fellow teacher at Land of Verse and wrote Asian American Herbalism, which was published last year. And so, Erin, we have some questions about the TCM perspective on fires. That's a huge question. I would like to ask and just narrow it down a little bit on what you think you can share about constitution or how fires would be affecting people based on the TCM perspective right now.
Hey, hey all. It's been such a great class. I've been listening in and having gone through some fire devastation in Sonoma County in 2018, I just remember not just wanting to be a helper, but also the fogginess and the communal like sadness and the difficulty just getting into action, even just for self-care. So I really appreciate the perspective that Laura and Jim had started with like what can we access in our markets locally. I would add for culturally significant herbs for API communities, going to local Asian markets where you'll find things like jujube dates, chia and blood tonic, that's going to just help overall energy, kind of like an adaptogen, really balancing, nourishing, hydrating. Any really dried fruit herbs, jujubes, of course, goji, mulberry. Those are also gonna be very hydrating, nourishing to blood and fluids. And then if people are wanting to get into the energetics, you can do a quick Google search for Qi tonic herbs, QI. Qi tonic herbs, triglyph will fall into that, ginseng, Cotinopsis. For people who are feeling dry, doing a search for blood nourishing herbs. Again, jujube date, Rehmannia, nettle will come forward. And then finally, the last little piece is that I recall that kind of invigorating, cooling herbs were really important during this time. So energetically, there's a lot of stagnation, we're a lot of holding, and there's a lot of heat in the air, right? And our bodies are inflamed and generating heat internally as well. So many common herbs: mint, elderflower, yarrow, thyme sage, mulberry, chrysanthemum. Just when you're looking at so many herbs, what am I going to choose? Like, go towards the cooler herbs. Yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you so much. Thank you. People are loving the additional TCM support, and thank you so much for also being here and helping us understand the constitutions and really what constitution is in Western herbalism. You'll see this as doshas and Ayurveda. You'll see it as yin and yang and five element in TCM, and then other indigenous lineages have different ways to share this language of what constitution is. And Jim was saying this on dosage. If you are someone with a weak constitution, or you find that you're a sensitive person, you know that generally. You know a little bit goes a long way. You're able to define this for yourself. If you feel like you're a hot person, you probably have a warm, hot constitution. If you're always cold and you find yourself undernourished often, you forget to eat all the time, your dosha is probably vata and you get anxiety, right? There's all these different traditions explain the same thing, which is everyone's an individual, but there's pretty strong categories of what individual looks like. And you'll be able to find your constitution with the right herb, because that constitutional herb also has similar qualities of how you want to balance it out, right? It's going to be nourishing or cooling if you're hot and dry, right? This is what constitutional herbalism is. And that's what you'll see in all the different traditions. As long as the herbalist has a strong foundation in their tradition, they will talk about constitutional remedies. So thank you so much, Erin, for bringing that up with the TCM perspective, and then Jim talking about the dosage perspective. It all is the same way to explain it in the unique languages of the different practitioners. Amazing. We have a number of questions. I have one here. It says, additional specific herbs you call upon when the smoke, dust, air pollution, inhalation triggers allergic type reactions. I had a feeling we were going to get the side effect, secondary effect questions about smoke. It can absolutely cause autoimmune disorders to heighten because of the stress response and the inflammation. It can cause a lot of allergies to increase, stress on the digestion to increase. You'll see cascade effects of a lot of people in these situations, not just from the fire, but from the stress load of the experience. So what I want to really make it clear is use those nervines, use those adaptogens to really support your nervous system right now, to support your body from that stress. Even if you're like, I'm fine in a crisis, right? I'm a firefighter. I am a police officer type person, even if you're not literally, like, I'm the one that jumps into the fire. That's a pitta person in Ayurveda. That is a fiery person. That's a hot person in Western constitutional remedies. This is a young person. This is a person that's jumping into the fire to save people, right? You manage stress by action. And if that's your thing, you want to keep nourishing your body, even if you manage stress in a way that you find that you can actually manage it a lot better than people, let's say, that have anxiety, panic attacks, shut down, freeze, right? You're both experiencing stress. Now, when I experience people that are the firefighters in the world, the go-getters, the like managing stress like that, they're often the least taking care of themselves because they're taking care of others. Now, I want you to consider yourself like the person that's having the anxiety attack and the panic attack as the same herb. If you're giving them ashwagandha, I want you to take ashwagandha. If you're giving them nervines, I want you to take the nervines. You will still manage that stress well. You will still go out and fight them. But what you'll do is not get that extreme, ideally, as extreme of burnout later after the stress load is done. So you can keep doing your work as a helper healer in the world. Now, what that is for someone that is seeing allergies and autoimmune disorders heighten right now is that they do need to make sure they're resting, drinking water, sleeping well, getting clean air, really nourishing themselves with broths and soups, and as much support as possible from others. Sorry, my dog. You just want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that yeah, we think about those people that want to jump in, the fire people, the choleric people in Western tradition, and that tendency to think like, well, the way that I deal with stress is by doing. If we don't recognize that we can overdo and lose our reserves, we will not be able to keep that up. The crash will be more intense afterwards. And it's difficult because they can often feel like rest or taking breaks is not doing something. And so sometimes we have to say, like, a break is doing something. Like saying, like, oh, I need to take a break so that I can continue to do this at the high level rather than starting to like lose my ability to keep up with what I'm asking my body and mind to be on top of, and losing my concentration and not being able to do as well as it needs to be done. If we can frame some of that self-care as an action rather than as not doing something, it can change the receptivity that they have to it.
I love that. And for those of us that have a hard time with that rest, maybe you read an herb book and write down all the things you need to do to take care of yourself so you can feel like you're doing something while you're resting, right? Allowing yourself to learn how to take care of yourself might be that ability to take care of yourself because you need some stimulation, some reason to manage that. And I know it's hard for those hypervigilant folks that really have to be out there. It's their purpose, it's their passion to be out there helping so many people in the world. We need you. We need all of you to be doing that. And the burnout is real and the crash is real and the overwhelm is real. And so how do we get better at it? And often we usually have friends that say, hey, let me take care of you for a second. You've been doing too much. So making sure you have your people, your co-collaborators that you're able to actually take and receive support from in this process. And if you don't have those, it looks like some people are offering that in the chat of connecting. So you can actually build those connections in LA, and we will send out resources in an email for those that are sharing those resources. So thank you so much for supporting people. Yeah. Erin, do you want to share anything about the heightened allergies during this time or heightened inflammation?
What was the question?
It was about the experience with smoke and stress and the heightened allergies and kind of autoimmune triggers, immune triggers essentially at this time.
Yeah. What I'll say just from the TCM perspective is that what we think of as an immune herb, let's use astragalus for an example. It's going to strengthen the immune system. In traditional Chinese medicine, we see that as strengthening our external boundary. And when our external boundary is strong, we're resilient to allergens, bacteria, viruses, smoke, energy from the outside world. So taking it, if you're feeling an uptick of allergies, all of it, the benefit for that are qi tonic herbs, again, the QI, qi tonic herbs. And also, if you want to get really nerdy, you can Google Wei Qi herbs, WEIQI herbs. And those are herbs that are going to actually help your energetic defenses. The other thing for allergies a flare up in TCM is hydrating fluids. So again, that would be blood and yin nourishing herbs.
Beautiful. And there's one more question that I know was asked, and this is an important question, I think. It says, what about aloe vera as slime? There's a lot in Southern California. I'm very curious, Jim, what you think about aloe vera, because I find it cooling but not moistening. And so that's where I would love to hear your perspective on aloe and what you think it's worthy of it being a demulcent versus a healing agent for the skin.
So aloe is it's definitely falls into the demulcent category. The biggest and most important distinction to make is that so if you're dealing with plants in Southern California where there's a lot of smoke, as you were saying, it might not be the right time to be collecting those plants because they're exposed to stuff. And probably for a period of time, it's just on the surface of the leaf, and we can think like, oh, if we wash off the leaf, we'll wash off the pollutants. But after a certain amount of time, and I don't feel like this is well established that we, know, just like if we put something in our skin, it's going to absorb into our body. If something's sitting on the surface of the leaf, it's eventually going to get into the plant leaf material, and we can't just wash it off. And then if we think about like, I'm going to use an aloe product, there's a huge difference between aloe leaf and aloe gel. Aloe gel is a demulcent and it can be moistening, but if any green part of the leaf is in there, it is a stimulant laxative. And that might be a real bummer. If you're in a situation where you're not wanting to suddenly and urgently have to evacuate, not leave an area evacuate, but have fluids abruptly leave your body evacuate, then that's not the direction you want to go in. Some aloe products will say very specifically aloe gel. Some aloe products just say aloe leaf, assume those have the green part, and some just say aloe, and it's uncertain. So we want to be mindful of that, but if you take an aloe product and then you're like, I really need to go to the bathroom right now, it's probably got leaf in there. I feel sometimes like things that say aloe gel seem to have such a strong laxative effect that they probably have aloe leaf in them. Maybe mislabeling, maybe, large scale mechanization is, not doing a good job of making that. But I'm a little bit leery about having that because if we're having strong bowel movements, that is going to be drying. That's fluid that's leaving our body. And in Western herbalism, we often use the term, if we go back to energetic Western herbalism, we talk about herbs that are drying. And there's two categories, or maybe three categories of herbs we fit in there. One would be bitter herbs and aromatic herbs that are causing your body to secrete fluids that leave your body. And because fluids are leaving your body, they are constitutionally drying. We also often include herbs that are astringent in there, but astringent herbs are surface drying and they're holding fluids in your body and preventing them from leaking out. So they're two different kinds of drying, but anything that is strongly laxative, anything that's making you have a lot of bowel movements and especially watery bowel movements is going to be significantly drying. And we don't want to be using those in a situation where everything about the environment, and also we're talking about Southern California where the environment is already pretty dry. We don't want to be sort of focusing on those or highlighting those in our approach to what we're doing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, you'll often see aloe's leaf called Cape aloes also. So just to know that that's not the inner leaf, that's the outer leaf that has that laxative property. So I think that you gave a very thorough description of the difference between the true gel, which is the total inside goo, and the outside that causes major challenges of defecation. This class is no way as treating diseases or treating illnesses. If you have any issue that you're trying to treat from this that does require a doctor or a practitioner, please seek one out. We are trying to give you common knowledge information that should be readily accessible to you all times. And I want to just share the last two slides with you before we leave today. This is just to say thank you for joining us. We are so excited. I will be sending this information to you. We are so excited that you're here and that you're supporting your community. So thank you for the work you're doing. We both have websites. And we have resources. This will also be shared with you, everyone that's here. Books that you can look up, podcasts, even Mountain Rose Herbs discount that they generously gave our student discount. If you're a student with Verse, you get a discount that they offered for any of you in this class. Using it for your own good and for the good of your community. Please do not go and buy, you know, a zillion pounds of something to get a small discount. This really is for practitioners. And that Traditional Medicinals is asking any organization in LA that does need a donation of herbs for their community to contact them directly. Donations@tradmed.com. They are sending herbs and teas down to LA. So thank you again, Jim. Thank you again, Erin, for jumping in. Thank you, Claire, for managing the chat. And I'm so grateful for you all. And please let us know if there's anything else that you need from us. You'll get a follow-up email with all of these resources. And